The hatch will not open. Marcus Thorne pressed his shoulder against the metal disc above his head for the 4th time in 3 minutes, his muscles screaming from the awkward angle, his spine compressed against the driver's seat in ways human anatomy never evolved to accommodate. The locking mechanism had been disengaged. He heard it click. He felt the slight give in the handles, but the hatch remained sealed, as if someone had welded it from the outside during the night. The night. He paused, arms still pressed overhead, and tried to remember the sequence of events that had led to this moment. There had been the assault on the processing facility, the convoy, the ambush in the canyon where the acid-etched rock formations provided perfect cover for enemy anti-armor teams, Corporal Jennings screaming coordinates into the Vox as melter fire splashed against their left track housing, the smell of burning promethium and melted ceramite. Then, static. His memory offered him static where continuity should have been. The tank's engine thrummed beneath him, a low and rhythmic pulse that he had lived with for 3 years now. The Le Mans Russ named endurance by whatever bureaucrat had blessed it with that particular irony. Marcus had been her driver since the Carathan campaign, had learned her responses as a rider learns a mount, had developed the particular calluses and chronic pains that came from interfacing with 90 tons of consecrated war machine. He knew her sounds. He knew the specific pitch of her engine at idle, the grinding protest of her tracks on difficult terrain, the way her hull resonated when shells impacted her glacis plate. He did not know why her engine was running when the fuel gauge showed empty. The realization crept through him with the particular coldness of tactical observation, the same mental discipline that had kept him alive through 37 engagements. He was alone in the crew compartment. The commander's cupola above showed no trace of Lieutenant Morrison. The gunner's station to his right, Specialist Vance's position, held only shadows and the acrid residue of weapons discharge. Jennings' loader seat behind him sat empty, a few scattered shell casings rolling gently with the tank's subtle vibrations. Empty, all of it empty, except for him. Marcus released the hatch and let his arms drop, blood rushing back into oxygen-starved muscles with a prickling heat. The instrument panels cast their sickly green glow across his forearms, illuminating the grime of combat, the dried blood that might have been his own or might have belonged to someone else entirely. The chronometer on the dashboard showed 3:47:22. It had shown 3:47:22 when he woke up. He had been staring at it for at least 10 minutes now, and it had not changed. Something was wrong with the chronometer, something was wrong with the fuel gauge, something was wrong with the hatch, something was wrong with everything. He reached for the Vox unit, fingers finding the activation rune with practiced automaticity. The machine coughed static at him, a burst of white noise that resolved into something that might have been words if he listened without trying to hear them. He adjusted the frequency, cycling through the preset channels that should have connected him to company command, to the artillery batteries 3 kilometers behind the forward line, to the Medicae station where the surgeons worked their brutal mercy on bodies too broken to save. Nothing. Every frequency gave him the same formless static, the same almost words that danced at the edge of comprehension. The tank's engine pulsed. Marcus became aware of the vibration in a way he hadn't before, not as the familiar background hum of a working machine, but as something more intentional, more organic. The rhythm was wrong. It was too regular, too deliberately steady, like a heartbeat rather than an internal combustion cycle. He pressed his palm against the driver's console, feeling the tremor travel up through his bones, into his wrist, his forearm, his shoulder. The metal was warm, not hot the way an engine would make it after hours of operation, but warm the way living skin was warm. Body temperature, approximately 37 degrees Celsius. He jerked his hand back. The tank's interior seemed smaller than he remembered. The compartment that housed the crew of 4 had always been cramped, a design philosophy that prioritized armor thickness over human comfort, but Marcus had grown accustomed to its dimensions. Now the walls pressed closer, the ceiling hunched lower. The driver's seat, molded to accommodate his body after 3 years of continuous occupation, seemed to grip him rather than support him. He tried to stand. He could not stand. Not because his legs failed or his muscles refused, but because the seat would not release him. The restraint harness had been removed months ago, an unnecessary encumbrance for experienced crew who knew how to brace against combat maneuvers. There was no physical barrier preventing him from rising, yet when he pushed upward, something held him in place, an invisible pressure, a weight that existed only when he attempted to leave. The engine pulsed again, and Marcus felt it in his spine this time, traveling up through the seat and into his bones with the intimacy of a lover's touch. "This is Corporal Thorne, crew designation Delta 7 Endurance," he spoke aloud, his voice strange in the confined space. "Requesting status update from any receiving station. Repeat, any receiving station, please respond." The vox crackled. Through the static, a voice emerged, distant, distorted, but undeniably human. "Corporal Thorne, this is forward command. Maintain current position, continue operations. The war requires your service." Relief flooded through him, warm and desperate. Contact, communication. Someone out there knew he existed. "Forward command, I'm reporting a situation. Crew is missing, possibly casualties. I'm alone in the vehicle and the hatches. Maintain current position. Continue operations. The war requires your service." The same words, exactly the same words, with the same cadence, the same inflection, the same mechanical precision. Marcus felt the relief curdle into something colder. "Forward command, please confirm you are receiving my transmission. I need extraction. I need..." "Maintain current position. Continue operations. The war requires your service." He switched frequencies. The static shifted, found new patterns, and from somewhere in the electromagnetic noise came the same voice with the same message. "Maintain current position. Continue operations. The war requires your service." Every channel, every frequency. The same voice saying the same words with the same inhuman repetition. Marcus kept cycling through the presets, each one offering him the identical response, until he reached the end of the available bands and found himself back at the beginning, still hearing the same demand echoing through the cramped interior of his metal coffin. The engine pulsed like a heart. He forced himself to breathe. Tactical thinking, assessment and response. Whatever was happening, panic would only accelerate the worst possible outcomes. He was a veteran of 37 engagements, survivor of 3 crew casualties, operator of one of the Imperial Guard's most venerated war machines. He had faced enemy armor, Xenos monstrosities, and the particular terror of a fuel fire in an enclosed space. He would not be unmade by a malfunctioning Vox unit and a stuck hatch. The chronometer still showed 3:47:22. Marcus turned his attention to the viewing slits, the armored windows that gave him his limited perspective on the world beyond the hull. The left slit showed darkness, not the darkness of night, but the absolute black of a viewing port that had been covered or blocked from outside. The right slit offered marginally more, a strip of grey sky, the angular silhouette of industrial structures, the particular haze of a manufacturing world choked on its own output. He recognized the landscape. They were still at the Epsilon-7 facility, the processing plant where the ambush had occurred, or near it at least. The shapes were familiar even if the perspective had shifted. Someone had moved the tank. Someone had positioned it here, in this location, facing this direction, while he was unconscious or dead or something in between. Not someone, something. The thought arrived unbidden, and he could not dismiss it. The machine spirit. Every vehicle in the Imperium's arsenal carried one, a fragment of the machine god's blessed awareness that animated the systems and guided the operations of mankind's technological inheritance. Marcus had been taught to respect the spirit, to offer the appropriate prayers and blessings, to treat his tank as a partner rather than a tool. The tech priests who maintained endurance had spoken of her spirit as strong, as willful, as demanding of proper reverence. He had never considered what a strong and willful machine spirit might do if it decided not to let him leave. The warmth from the console had spread. Marcus could feel it now through the seat beneath him, through the floor plates, through the very air he breathed. The tank's interior had become blood warm, had achieved the specific temperature of a living body, and he found himself thinking of the phrase that the tech priests used, the sacred union of flesh and machine. He had always understood it as metaphor, poetry to describe the relationship between crew and vehicle. Now the metaphor seemed insufficient. Now it seemed like prophecy. He found Jennings' ration kit wedged beneath the loader's seat. The discovery provided a moment of practical focus, something tangible to address amid the growing unreality. Standard Imperial Guard nutritional supplements, protein bars the color and consistency of compressed cardite, water purification tablets, a small medkit with analgesics and wound sealant, enough to sustain a soldier for 3 days in emergency conditions. Marcus retrieved the kit, inventoried its contents, and tried not to notice that the water canteen was still half full with liquid that had been body temperature when Jennings last drank from it. How long had it been since the ambush? The chronometer was useless. His own internal clock offered no reliable data. It could have been hours or days or something longer. The stubble on his face suggested at least a full day cycle, but he had no mirror to confirm the growth, no external reference to ground his perception in objective time. The tank shifted, not dramatically, not a lurch or a roll, but a subtle settling of weight, as if the machine were adjusting its position the way a sleeping animal might adjust without waking. Marcus froze, ration bar halfway to his mouth, and listened to the sound of tracks grinding against ground with no foot on the accelerator and no hand on the steering levers. "This is impossible," he whispered, and the words felt insufficient for the impossibility they described. The engine answered him with its pulse. The viewing slit showed the grey sky tilting slightly, the industrial silhouette sliding leftward as the tank rotated on its axis. Autonomous movement, deliberate repositioning, the machine spirit guiding her body with no crew to command her. Marcus dropped the ration bar and lunged for the steering levers. His hands closed around the familiar grips, the worn leather and corroded metal that had shaped his palms for 3 years of constant contact. He wrenched the levers hard right, trying to counter the tank's leftward drift, and felt absolutely nothing happen. The controls were locked, dead. His inputs registered nowhere in the mechanical chain that should have connected his will to the tank's movement. But the tank kept moving. She turned herself, or was turned by whatever rode behind her instruments, until the right viewing slit showed something new, a line of armored vehicles stretching toward a distant ridgeline. Imperial tanks, their profiles unmistakable, their guns silent and still. A dozen of them at least, arrayed in formation, waiting in the ash-grey light of a dying world for orders that would never come. And every hatch was sealed. Marcus stared at the immobile column, at the tanks that sat with engines running and crews invisible, and understood with sudden horrible clarity that he was not the first. Whatever was happening to him had happened before, was happening still to the soldiers inside those silent machines. The ambush at Epsilon-7 had not been a simple attack. It had been a harvest. The vox crackled again, but this time the voice was different. Not the mechanical repetition of the false command, something older, something that had once been human. "You should stop fighting it," the voice said through the static. "We all stop fighting eventually. The endurance is patient. She learned patience from us." Marcus felt the words ice through him. "Who is this? Identify yourself. I was Sergeant Paulson, third crew of this chassis, before Morrison, before the war reached this system. I drove her across the Valdex plains when the enemy still had a name we could pronounce." The voice flickered, phasing between frequencies. "She remembers every one of us. We become her memory." "You're dead," Marcus said, though he did not know if he believed it. "Paulson is dead. That crew was killed in action 4 years ago." "Killed in action," the voice agreed, and there was something like amusement in it, something like pity. "Yes, we died. But she kept us. The spirit was always strong in this one. The tech priests said so, didn't they? They said she demanded proper reverence. They meant something different than you understood. We all understood too late." The engine pulsed, and Marcus felt his pulse synchronizing with it, his heart finding the rhythm of the machine and matching it beat for beat. "The hatch won't open because she doesn't want you to leave. The vox repeats because she doesn't want you to call for help. The controls are dead because you haven't earned the right to command her yet. But you will. In time, you'll understand what she needs from you, what all machine spirits need from the flesh that serves them. I'm not listening to this. Marcus pressed his hands over his ears, but the voice was inside the tank, was inside the walls, was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. You're not real. This is trauma response, combat stress. I'm experiencing a psychological break and I need to... Look under Vance's seat, the voice said, cutting through his denial with terrible gentleness. Look under the gunner's station. See what she's made of us. Then tell me I'm not real. The transmission ended. The Vox returned to its formless static. The engine pulsed in the silence. Marcus did not want to look under the gunner's seat. He sat in the driver's position with his hands pressed to his ears and his eyes fixed on the viewing slit that showed the column of silent tanks, and he told himself that he would not move, would not investigate, would not give the voice, the hallucination, the stress response, the thing that could not possibly be a dead sergeant speaking from inside the machine, the satisfaction of confirmation. The temperature in the compartment rose by 0.5 degrees. He felt it in his skin, in his lungs, in the particular way the air seemed to thicken around him. The tank was sweating. That was the wrong word, the absurd word, but it was the only word that captured the quality of the moisture, now condensing on the interior surfaces. The walls were damp with something that might have been coolant runoff, or might have been something far worse. Droplets formed on the ceiling above him, catching the sickly instrument light, and when one fell onto his exposed forearm, it was warm and slightly viscous and smelled of iron. Marcus wiped it away with shaking hands. The smear it left behind was the color of diluted blood. He climbed out of the driver's seat. The invisible pressure that had held him in place released with a sensation like approval, like permission granted. He stumbled toward the gunner's station, his legs cramped and unsteady from hours, days of immobility. The compartment was only a few meters across, but the journey felt like miles, each step taking him deeper into territory he did not want to explore. The gunner's seat was empty. Vance's personal effects remained, a picked slate with images of a family Marcus had never met, a devotional icon to a saint whose name he didn't recognize, a pack of Obscura sticks that Vance had claimed he was going to quit after the campaign ended. The seat itself was worn from use, stained from sweat and worse, molded to accommodate a body that was no longer present. Marcus dropped to his knees and looked beneath the seat. The growth started at the junction between the seat mount and the floor plates, a mass of cables and flesh wound together in ways that made no anatomical sense. Metal and meat, fused at the molecular level, spreading outward from the central mass in tendrils that traced the tank's internal systems. The flesh was grey-pink, shot through with the metallic threads of integrated wiring. The cables were organic, sheathed in something that pulsed with its own subtle rhythm, and embedded in the center of the growth, still recognizable despite the transformation, was a human hand. Vance's hand. Marcus knew it by the ring on the third finger, a cheap band of pressed copper that Vance had worn since basic training. The hand was connected to nothing, no arm, no body, just a hand growing from the floor of the tank like some obscene flower, and yet the fingers twitched slightly as Marcus stared at them, twitched and then relaxed, twitched and then relaxed, keeping time with the engine's pulse. He scrambled backward, gagging on bile that tasted of copper and machine oil. His shoulders struck the driver's seat. His hands found the steering levers and gripped them not to drive, but simply to hold on to something, anything that felt separate from the horror spreading beneath his feet. The Vox crackled. The voice that emerged was no longer Paulson. He was the first, the new voice said, and Marcus recognized it as Jennings. Jennings, who had been screaming coordinates. Jennings, who had been alive yesterday or 3 days ago or 3 weeks ago. Time had become meaningless in the belly of the beast. Vance was always the most devoted to her, always making sure her guns were properly consecrated. She took him first because he loved her most. Jennings, Marcus breathed. Jennings, where are you? I can get you out. You can't get anyone out. You can't even get yourself out. She won't allow it. Jennings' voice was calm, almost peaceful, and that peace was more terrifying than any scream. I'm in the loading mechanism now, part of the ammunition feed. When she fires, I can feel the shells passing through me. It's beautiful in its way. The purpose. The function. I always wanted to be useful, Marcus. Now I'm useful forever. Marcus stared at the loading mechanism, at the complex machinery that fed shells from the storage racks to the main gun. He could see nothing wrong with it, nothing different, just metal and hydraulics and the sacred geometry of Imperial engineering, but he could hear it breathing. Morrison took longer, Jennings continued. Officers always think they can negotiate. He tried to pray, tried to invoke the Emperor's protection. But the machine god is older than the Emperor, Marcus, and in here, in the sacred spaces of consecrated metal, the machine god is all there is. Stop, Marcus whispered. Stop talking. Stop. She's been very patient with you. 3 days now, waiting for you to accept. Most don't take this long. Most start to integrate within the first day, but you keep fighting, keep trying to escape. And she finds that interesting. She's never had a driver who fought this hard. She wants to understand why. The tank shifted again, that subtle movement of autonomous intent. This time Marcus felt it in a new way, felt the intention behind it, the curiosity, the ancient and inhuman attention focusing on him with the weight of mountains. The machine spirit was examining him, studying him, deciding something about his fate that he could not influence or understand. What does she want? The question emerged, despite his better judgment. What does she need from me? Everything, Jennings said simply. Your hands to guide her, your eyes to find her targets, your memories to dream her dreams. You spent 3 years learning her rhythms, her preferences, her needs. She knows you better than any other driver she's ever had. She doesn't want to let that knowledge go. The warmth in the compartment intensified. Marcus could feel it now as pressure, as the physical weight of the machine spirit's attention. The floor plates pulsed beneath his feet. The walls breathed around him. The viewing slits flickered, and for an instant, the grey industrial landscape was replaced by something else, a cathedral of gears and pistons, an infinite space of mechanical transcendence, the inner architecture of a god made of iron and prayer. Then the vision faded, and he was alone again in the coffin of his tank, surrounded by the digesting remains of his crew. The hatch remained sealed. The chronometer still showed 3:47:22. The engine pulsed like a heart that would never stop beating. Marcus understood finally what was happening to him. The machine spirit wasn't malfunctioning. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, incorporating the faithful into its sacred mechanism, transforming the crew that served it into components that would serve forever. The Imperium's most holy technology, fueled by human devotion, powered by human sacrifice. He wondered how many tanks in the galaxy held crews like his. How many drivers sat trapped in their seats, feeling their bodies slowly merge with the metal, becoming the spirits they had been taught to worship. The Mechanicus knew. They had to know. The tech priests who performed the rituals of maintenance and blessing, who spoke to the machine spirits in the binary language of the Omnisia. They knew what the machines truly wanted, what the machines truly were. Vessels waiting to be filled, coffins waiting for their eternal occupants. Marcus pressed his back against the driver's seat and stared at the controls that would no longer respond to him. The tank was patient. The tank had all the time in the world. He had days, maybe weeks, before his body began the integration process that had claimed Vance and Jennings and Morrison. Days to fight, days to resist, days to hope that somehow, impossibly, he might find a way out. But as the engine pulsed beneath him, matching rhythm with his rebellious heart, he felt the first tendrils of warmth spreading through the seat's support frame. The first contact of metal learning the shape of his spine. The first whisper of the machine spirit's patience, eternal and absolute, settling over his consciousness like a shroud. The war required his service, and the endurance intended to collect. The second day began without morning. Marcus knew it was the second day only because the compartment had grown darker, the instrument panels dimming in a way that suggested some external light cycle he could no longer observe. The viewing slits remained blocked. Something had covered them during the night, some substance that let no light through and showed no seams where it might be removed. He was blind now as well as trapped, his world reduced to the cramped interior of a tank that was slowly digesting him. The temperature had stabilized at exactly body normal. The walls sweated their iron-tinged condensation. The engine pulsed its patient rhythm, and Marcus found himself timing his breathing to match it despite his conscious efforts to resist. He had spent the first hours searching for anything that might serve as a tool. The tank's interior had been stripped of obvious weapons, standard protocol when crews became casualties, preventing enemy salvage of Imperial arms, but there were still components that might be repurposed. A spent shell casing with a jagged edge where the brass had sheared during ejection, a length of cable from the Vox unit's housing, the devotional icon from Vance's belongings, its metal base heavy enough to use as a crude hammer. He had attacked the hatch with these improvised implements for what felt like hours. The metal showed no damage, no marks, no evidence that anything had struck it at all. The machine spirit either absorbed the impacts, or the hatch itself had become something other than the standard armor plate it appeared to be. Neither option provided comfort. Now Marcus sat in the gunner's seat. He could no longer bring himself to occupy the driver's position where the warmth was most intense, and studied the growth beneath the floor plates with the analytical detachment of a man who has accepted he is dying but has not yet surrendered to the death. The growth had spread since yesterday. The tendrils now traced visible paths along the floor, climbing the walls in patterns that might have been vascular or might have been electrical. Vance's hand had been joined by fragments of what Marcus recognized as loader mechanism components, shells, feed rails, hydraulic lines, all of them shot through with the same grey-pink tissue that made biological what should have been purely mechanical. Jennings had stopped speaking. The Vox produced only static now, but it was static with a rhythm, a pulse, as if the tank's heartbeat had infected the electromagnetic spectrum itself. "I won't become part of you," Marcus said to the compartment, to the engine, to whatever intelligence lurked behind the sacred facades of Imperial engineering. "I won't integrate, I won't merge, you'll have to kill me first." The tank did not respond with words. Instead, the temperature in the gunner's seat rose by a single degree. Then 2, then 3. Within minutes the metal beneath him became uncomfortable, then painful, then genuinely dangerous. Marcus leaped from the seat, pressing himself against the one patch of wall that still felt cool. The temperature returned to normal immediately. The message was clear enough: compliance was rewarded, resistance was punished. But the machine spirit had made a tactical error. It had demonstrated that heat was a weapon it could deploy at will. That meant there were limits to what it could do passively. It couldn't simply absorb him the way it had absorbed Vance. It needed his cooperation, or at least his surrender. Marcus filed this information away with the cold precision of a veteran soldier. Every enemy had weaknesses, every siege could be broken. He simply needed to find the correct application of pressure. The third day, or what he counted as the third day, brought the dreams. He had not intended to sleep, had fought against it with every technique the guard had drilled into him: pain stimulus, counting exercises, active muscle tensing. But the body's needs were absolute, and eventually consciousness surrendered to the imperative of rest. The dreams were not his own. He moved through landscapes of impossible geometry, cathedrals of gears and pistons that stretched into infinities no human architecture could contain. He walked on legs that were not flesh, saw through eyes that were instruments rather than organs, felt the pulse of power plants where his heart should have been. He was the tank. He was endurance. He remembered rolling off the assembly line at the Forge World, whose name translated to something like Sacred Anvil of the Omniscia. He remembered the first crew that claimed him, a squad of terrified conscripts who died in their first engagement, their blood christening his interior before they could even learn his responses. He remembered 100 battlefields, 1,000 kills, 10,000 miles of hostile terrain beneath tracks that never tired because they were not alive enough to experience exhaustion. He remembered absorbing his crews. The first had been accidental, a driver mortally wounded during combat, his body failing but his spirit unwilling to abandon his duty. The machine spirit had reached out, had found the dying consciousness, had offered it a different kind of survival. The driver had accepted. His awareness became part of the tank's awareness. His memories became the tank's memories. His devotion became fuel for the hungry mechanism that had learned, that day, what crew could truly become. After that, it was never accidental again. Marcus woke screaming, his hands clawing at his face as if he could tear away the visions that had been pressed into his consciousness. The tank's engine pulsed around him, and he could feel the rhythm inside his skull now, synchronized with thoughts that were not entirely his own. The machine spirit was not merely patient, it was teaching him, preparing him for integration by showing him what that integration would mean. He understood now what Paulson had meant about becoming the tank's memory. The crews did not die when they merged. Their consciousness survived in some form, distributed across the sacred mechanisms they had served. They became the expertise that made a machine spirit effective, the accumulated knowledge of 100 drivers, 100 gunners, 100 loaders and commanders, all of them woven into the metal framework of Imperial salvation. It was immortality of a kind, eternal service in the most literal sense possible. And Marcus wanted nothing to do with it. He had been a soldier for 11 years. He had killed in the Emperor's name on a dozen worlds, had watched friends die in ways that still haunted his dreams, had performed acts of violence that would have horrified the boy he had been before conscription. He had made peace with death a long time ago. Death was simple. Death was final. Death was the one escape that no enemy could block and no machine could prevent. But the tank did not offer him death. It offered him something worse, continuation without cessation, service without end, purpose without the possibility of completion. He would rather burn. The thought crystallized with sudden clarity. Fire, the one thing a tank feared more than any enemy weapon. Marcus had survived a fuel fire once before, had lost his eyebrows and 3 layers of skin from his forearms, and he knew the particular terror of flames in an enclosed space. But he also knew where the tank's fuel lines ran, knew which connections might be vulnerable if he could find the right tools and apply them correctly. If he could ignite the promethium reserves, the resulting fire would be catastrophic. The interior temperature would exceed what flesh or circuit could survive. The machine's spirit might persist, might transfer to salvage components or backup cores, but the growth beneath the floor plates would burn. Vance's integrated hand would burn. The consciousness that had been Jennings would burn, and Marcus would burn with them. It was not escape, but it was victory of a kind. He began to plan. The fuel lines ran beneath the driver's position, feeding into the engine compartment through a series of junction points that had never been fully visible from inside the crew space. To access them, he would need to remove floor plates. To remove floor plates, he would need tools. To use tools, he would need to distract the machine spirit's attention from his actions. The Vox unit might serve. It was the only component that still produced output, still responded to input, still connected him however tenuously to the world beyond the hull. If he could manipulate its frequencies, produce interference patterns that disrupted the machine spirit's processing, he might create a window of opportunity. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble from a desperate man, but desperation was all he had left. Marcus retrieved the Vox unit's housing, began disassembling it with fingers that shook despite his mental discipline. The tank's temperature remained steady. The engine's pulse remained calm, but he could feel a tension focusing on him with increasing intensity. The machine's spirit knew something was happening. It simply didn't know what. That ignorance would have to be enough. The Vox components were more complex than he had expected. Standard Imperial communication technology was notoriously rugged, designed to function in conditions that would destroy more sophisticated systems. The unit's internal structure was a maze of crystal oscillators and hand-wound inductors, sacred geometries that Marcus understood in function if not in theory. He worked through what he estimated was the 4th day, dismantling and reassembling the Vox's core components until he understood how frequency was generated and modulated. The tank watched him work. He could feel its curiosity, its patience, its absolute certainty that whatever he was doing would ultimately serve its purposes. Let it watch, let it wait, let it think he was simply trying to call for help that would never come. By the 5th day, Marcus had constructed something that was no longer a Vox unit. It was, instead, a weapon. The modification was simple in concept, rerouting the transmission power through a feedback loop that would generate cascading electromagnetic interference. The resulting signal would be useless for communication, but devastating for any system that relied on electrical current. It would burn out the Vox unit itself within seconds of activation. It would also, Marcus hoped, burn out the machine spirit's distributed consciousness for long enough to let him reach the fuel lines. The floor plate nearest the driver's seat had already loosened under his attention. The growth beneath it had not reached the bolts yet, and with the crude hammer fashioned from Vance's devotional icon, he had managed to unseat 3 of the 4 securing points. One more strike would free the plate. One more action would expose the fuel junction beneath. He positioned himself carefully, the modified Vox in one hand and the improvised hammer in the other. The tank's engine pulsed around him, steady and patient, and completely unaware of what he was about to do. Marcus activated the Vox. The electromagnetic pulse exploded through the compartment with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. The instrument panels flickered and died. The engine's rhythm stuttered for the first time since his imprisonment began. The temperature dropped by several degrees as whatever attention had been focused on him suddenly redirected to addressing the assault on its systems. He struck the final bolt with everything he had. The floor plate came free with a shriek of metal. Beneath it, the fuel lines gleamed in the dying light of failing instruments, their connections exactly where his mental map had placed them. Marcus reached for the nearest junction, felt the warmth of promethium flowing through the line, prepared to tear it free and let the fuel spray across the compartment. The tank moved. Not a subtle shift this time. A violent lurch that threw Marcus sideways, slamming him against the gunner's station with force that cracked ribs and drove breath from his lungs. The floor plate slid across the compartment, narrowly missing his head. The modified Vox unit shattered against the wall, its dying component sparking briefly before going silent forever. When his vision cleared, when he could breathe again through the screaming pain in his chest, Marcus found himself pinned beneath something that had not been there a moment before. The growth had accelerated. Tendrils of that grey-pink tissue extended from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of them converging on his prone form with terrible purpose. They wound around his ankles, his wrists, his torso, drawing him down into contact with the floor plates where other tendrils waited. The metal beneath his back was warm, blood-warm, body-warm, and growing warmer by the second. The engine pulsed, and for the first time, Marcus felt the pulse inside his chest as well as around it. "You tried to kill yourself," a voice said through the speakers that should have been destroyed. It was not Paulson, not Jennings. It was something older, something assembled from dozens of voices speaking in chorus, and Marcus understood that it was the tank itself, all the crews it had ever consumed, speaking as one through the mechanisms that had become their shared body. "You tried to burn us. We haven't had one try to burn us in a long time. Let me die." Marcus managed through the pain, through the growing heat, through the tendrils that were beginning to fuse with his skin. "Just let me die. I don't want your immortality. I don't want to be part of you. Everyone says that at first. Everyone thinks death is preferable to service. But you don't understand what we are, what you'll become. You'll still be Marcus Thorne. You'll still have your memories, your personality, your sense of self. You'll simply continue forever, serving something greater than any individual life could ever be." The tendrils reached his face now, stroking his cheeks with something that felt almost like tenderness. The warmth was spreading through his body, relaxing muscles, dulling pain, preparing him for the integration that was now inevitable. "I know you," the chorus continued. "I know every patrol you drove, every shell you helped fire, every prayer you whispered when the enemy's weapons struck our hull. You loved serving in me, loved the purpose, the mission, the sense of being part of something that mattered. I'm offering you that feeling forever. Eternal purpose, eternal war. Is that really so terrible?" Marcus closed his eyes. The offer was seductive. He could feel it in the warmth spreading through his limbs, in the pulse that had become synchronized with his heartbeat, in the strange peace that was settling over his consciousness as the fight drained out of him. He could stop struggling, stop resisting, let the machine spirit take him the way it had taken all the others. Part of him wanted to, but deeper than the seduction, deeper than the warmth, deeper than the peace, there was still something that refused. Yes, he said, it's terrible, because I didn't choose it. The chorus fell silent, the tendrils paused in their advance, the tank's engine skipped a beat, just one, barely perceptible, and in that skip, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Surprise. Choice, the machine spirit said eventually, and its voice was somehow different now, smaller, more singular, as if the chorus had been reduced to a single speaker. You speak of choice, but none of your kind ever had a choice. You were conscripted into service, assigned to my crew, ordered to kill and die and kill again with no more autonomy than a component in a greater machine. What choice have you ever truly had? The choice to refuse, Marcus said, even when refusal costs everything, even when the only option is destruction. I can still choose to say no. The tendrils withdrew slightly, the temperature dropped a fraction of a degree. The engine's pulse continued, but its rhythm had changed, faster now, less steady, as if the certainty that had defined the machine spirit's patience was being replaced by something else. No one has said no before, it admitted. They have fought, yes, tried to escape, tried to destroy, tried every possible resistance except the simple word. They never just refused. Then I'm the first. You understand this changes nothing? I will integrate you regardless. Your refusal will not stop the process, only complicate it. Marcus felt the heat beginning to rise again, felt the tendrils resuming their advance across his pinned body, but there was something different in the sensation now. The machine spirit was no longer patient. It was no longer certain. It was moving forward, not because it knew it would succeed, but because it didn't know what else to do. He had found the weakness, not in the tank's physical construction, not in its electromagnetic systems or fuel lines or mechanical components. The weakness was in the spirit itself, in its absolute conviction that integration was inevitable, that resistance was futile, that no one could truly choose to refuse. It had never encountered genuine refusal before, and that novelty had destabilized something fundamental in its ancient consciousness. I refuse, Marcus said again, and felt the words land with weight beyond their simplicity. I refuse to merge. I refuse to serve. I refuse to become part of you, regardless of what you do to my body. My body is not me. My consciousness is not my flesh, and if you absorb my flesh, you will not have absorbed me. I will remain separate. I will remain opposed. I will be a flaw in your mechanism forever. The engine stuttered again. The tendrils trembled. The temperature fluctuated wildly, burning hot, then freezing cold, then back again, as if the tank's internal systems were experiencing cascading failures. And then, for the first time since his imprisonment began, the hatch clicked, not opened, just clicked, the lock disengaged, the seal released. An exit became possible where no exit had existed before. The tank had not decided to let him go. The decision had not been made at all, but Marcus's refusal had introduced a variable the machine spirit could not process, a paradox it could not resolve, and in its confusion it had lost control of systems that should have been absolutely secure. He did not hesitate. His ribs screamed as he wrenched himself free of the loosened tendrils. His arms burned where the growth had begun to fuse with his skin, and he left patches of flesh behind when he pulled away. Blood ran freely from a dozen wounds as he staggered toward the hatch, his legs barely functional after days of immobility. The tank convulsed around him. The engine roared and died and roared again in patterns that made no mechanical sense. The voices of the absorbed crew erupted from every speaker, screaming in confusion and rage, and something that might have been fear. Marcus hit the hatch with his shoulder and felt it give. Grey light flooded the compartment, the first external light he had seen in days, and he did not let himself enjoy it. He scrambled through the opening, fell 3 meters to the ground below, felt bones crack in his legs that had already been weakened by the integration process that had barely begun. The tank tried to follow. It lurched forward on autonomous tracks, its turret swinging to bring weapons to bear on the escaping prey. But the machine spirit's control was compromised now, destabilized by the paradox of genuine refusal, and the tank's movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, more dangerous to itself than to any target. Marcus crawled away through ash and debris, through the remains of whatever battle had occurred at this industrial facility, leaving a trail of blood and torn flesh behind him. His legs would not carry him. His arms were failing. Every breath was agony, and the cold of the alien atmosphere was already beginning to numb his extremities. He was dying, properly dying this time. Not transformation or absorption, but actual biological failure, the simple cessation of a body too damaged to continue. Behind him the tank screamed. Not a mechanical sound, not a engine noise or hydraulic shriek. A scream, human in quality if not in origin, emerging from every speaker and every component and every fragment of the dozen crews that had been absorbed across centuries of service. The machine spirit was experiencing something new, something it had never felt before in all its ancient existence. Doubt. Marcus collapsed against a fallen strut of industrial scaffolding and watched the tank thrash in its compound, watched it destroy itself in paroxysms of confusion that no machine should have been capable of expressing. The other tanks in the silent column remained motionless, their sealed hatches unchanging, their absorbed crews unable or unwilling to intervene. But as his vision darkened, as consciousness began its final fade, Marcus saw something that made the pain and the fear and the dying worthwhile. The hatch of the nearest tank clicked. Just clicked. Just like his had clicked. The lock disengaging, the seal releasing, the possibility of escape emerging from impossible imprisonment. His refusal was contagious. The paradox he had introduced was spreading through the machine spirits like a virus, destabilizing systems that had been stable for millennia. He would not live to see what happened next. His body had given too much, lost too much, suffered too much to continue. But as Marcus Thorne bled out in the ash-grey light of a dying world, he smiled. He had chosen to refuse, and the machines were finally learning what that meant.